Good day, everybody. Randy Franklin Smith here, and today we're talking about a phenomena and problem and challenge that I'm not sure there's anybody that's not facing it right now with security monitoring, and that is alert fatigue. When your SIM cries wolf too many times, nothing good can come of that. And what we're going to look at is security automation and orchestration as the way to deal with this. And today's webinar is made possible by LogRhythm. I've got two very smart people here from LogRhythm. We've got Chris Petersen, one of the founders of LogRhythm and currently the CTO, and we also have Caitlin NoePayne, which is no stranger to our Real Training for Free webinars. And thank you both for helping me put together today's session, and to the larger LogRhythm organization for making today's Real Training for Free possible.
Yeah, we're excited to join you.
Happy to be here.
Great. So folks, here's kind of the order of battle today. I'm going to paint kind of three surrounding peripheral, well, I hate the word peripheral maybe in this case because they're not unimportant. They're really the drivers for the need and the development of SAO, Security Automation Orchestration. And that is, first of all, just the growth in any measure of cybersecurity. Talk about that a little bit. Everything's increasing in magnitude. That directly leads to what we call alert fatigue, which we're going to drill down into. And alert fatigue, really I've seen in developing this with the folks at LogRhythm, affects every level of a SOC team. And then we'll look at the increasing burden of manual effort burden of investigating an alarm that a SOC analyst faces. Because we have more tools and resources than ever, but that in turn can become a double-edged sword. And so all of this then is what's driving this trend towards SAO. So we'll look at what is SAO really, what is the difference between automation and orchestration. Also, we're going to distinguish something that I had to get straight in my own mind, and it may be the case with you too, and that is the difference between SAO and fine-tuning. They're both important, but they're different. Now, with anything that is new and that we need support from management, and I think sometimes we are the practitioners. We work down at the technical level in the trenches, but that's not where managers are. It's not where executive level folks are. And if we try to talk to them in our terms, then we're not going to get the outcome that we're necessarily looking for. So I hope that our content there, and especially Chris's perspective, is helpful to everybody on that. And then enough with talking about it, we'll actually see SAO in action as executed by LogRhythm. And that's primarily going to be handled by Caitlin. So let's drive into this. First of all, I think the point here is that everything in cybersecurity is growing. By any measurement, it's increasing in magnitude, whether it's the different types of attackers, whether it's the level of sophistication of attacks, whether it's the types of attacks, whether it's our attack surface. It used to be Windows systems and Linux systems, and now it's so much more than that. There's, IoT, there's everything up in the cloud, there's mobile devices everywhere, and so then that means we've got gobs more data coming to us in different formats, and all of this just creates a deluge of information. Chris, what isn't growing in cybersecurity right now?
What isn't growing?
Yeah,
That's an interesting question.
What's your take on how everything is expanding, whether it's the number of attacks or the increases that we're seeing in cyber threats?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess I'd say what isn't growing, I guess, proportionally to the risk organizations face due to the rise in threats, the number of potentially real threats they have to manage, is honestly the size of security teams, right? I think most organizations would feel like if they really want to keep on top of all of this, they would need to triple, quadruple, 10x the size of their team, and that's just not organizationally feasible, and that leaves organizations vulnerable. I think when you look at all these factors, and I guess the one thing I might add in there that is growing is when I think back to the last 15 years, from when we started LogRhythm. I feel like we're back in an age where we are very much investing in detection again, and companies are investing in more sensors. They're turning on the detection features of protection devices, and so we do have this great visibility into the environments and things that might potentially indicate a threat. But as you mentioned, it just creates a lot of data and a lot of alarms to get through that most teams are struggling to keep up with.
Absolutely, and I love your point that the one thing that's not growing is the size of teams, while everything else that they have to do is, and that's an even better response than I was saying. Is like nothing's not growing, but that's the one key thing, and so what that leads to is alert fatigue, and this is bad on so many different levels. Again, I will always be a practitioner, and I think about what makes a good security analyst. It's somebody, of course, who's technical, but it's somebody who's analytical, who's curious, and who's enthusiastic. And for me, I think I'm kind of those things. But if you give me a nonstop treadmill of repetitive manual effort, that's just a mind-killing and trait-killing dynamic for me. And I imagine, I'd like to hear from everybody else, but I imagine a lot of the rest of you feel the same way. So if we're going through just this deluge of alarms that is the natural result from how everything is growing on the cybersecurity threat landscape, then it can be pretty discouraging. But in talking with you, Chris, I think you kind of can bring out a good point that alarm fatigue isn't just a complaint of security analysts. It's not just part of a job, but it's really, it becomes a business risk, alert fatigue. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, I think as a business, and if you put yourself in the seat of the CISO or the person who's acting as the CISO and kind of looking after the cyber risk for an organization, I think when we think about detection, I think there are two kind of prevailing concerns, that do really influence your cybersecurity risk posture. One, is your tolerance for experiencing what I would call a false negative. Where how willing are you to potentially have a compromise occur in the environment and not have either the detection ability or the operational capability within your security team to have detected that it happened. Where then a false negative then might lead to lateral movement and other things that ultimately might lead to a damaging cyber incident. And then the other, the other key factor is false alarm probability, and that's and what I would call also just like false alarm or false positive load for your team. How many alarms are you getting that ultimately turn out to be a false positive? And these two things, are a bit diametrically opposed, if you will. I mean, the lower tolerance you have for false negative risk means you're going to generate more alarms inherently. You're going to have more visibility, and you're going to want to be able to actually address a higher false positive load, because you want to be sure that if anything could potentially be a threat, you want to have eyes on it. But that does mean there's going to be false positives. If you remove all your false positives, what that means, bottom line, is you have a lot of false negative risk today, because nobody has yet built the perfect analytics and perfect sensors that only report true positives. And so I think the question then, with alarm fatigue, is how do we, through technology, ideally get the best and highest highest quality alarms in front of analysts and make them as efficient and effective as possible. I think that's really where SAO can come in, especially the automation side and the workflow side, because we want to, through technology, be enabling people to do what they are still best at, which is to apply their cognitive skills, to be able to look at the alarm, look at data, understand the context of the environment, of the event itself, and to be able to make decisions that people are still best qualified to make. Where everything else we want to offload into software. We want to offload as much of the analytics that pre-qualify alerts. We want to offload repetitive manual tasks, right? We want to do everything possible in technology to return to that, that human operator more cognitive cycles, so that their throughput is higher and they're actually doing more interesting work because they're using their mind versus they're doing a bunch of repetitive, button clicking.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it has a lot of other factors. It can improve retention because really good people want a really good challenge, and they're going to be more likely to move on and look elsewhere. So it all feeds together, and we're going to come back and revisit that false negative and false alarm thing as we go along and some of these other points. In fact, let's just do a quick exercise then. We have this problem of alert fatigue, and so how do we address it? Now we already know the end answer is going to be SAO, but let's just look at what the alternatives are. We can hire more and spread the pain around, but that's not going to happen for a couple reasons. There's always budget, but I think probably most people realize that growing headcount, the amount of work accomplished does not scale linearly in relation to your growth of headcount, right? It's not as efficient as that. And so then what's the other thing? Well, we decrease the number of alerts via tuning, but now we're going to start missing those needles in the haystack. Again, then that's just the long route to getting to the point that Chris was making, and that is we need to automate. We need more and better technology to allow our SOC analysts, regardless of what level they're at, to be able to do what they're good at and save their minds for what we have them for. Let's see how SAO allows that. But before we do, I just want to think a little bit about, in today's environment, once we get an alarm, what are all the potential places that a SOC analyst may need to go in order to work this alarm? And It's kind of the result of improved access and increase in resources. So, what happens? An alarm comes in about a given user. So if our solution doesn't already get this information for us, and I still see a lot of people swiveling over to Active Directory and sometimes the HR system, just to find out who is this user, what's their job, should we expect the kind of behavior that we're seeing, who are their peers, and what's their physical location. And then this is a killer, correlating the user to their endpoint, because so much of the log data that comes in and security intelligence is actually tied to the endpoint and isn't associated automatically with the user. And so I still see lots and lots of organizations where the analyst has to make that correlation so that they can then recognize packets on the network and as being Bob's and attribute them to Bob's behavior, or at least the behavior of whatever malware is executing as Bob. Then we see a new program running, probably the hash of the program. And so nowadays we have these awesome things like VirusTotal and other threat intel lists where we can go out and find out what is this thing. But that, again, that takes work. We're swiveling over to another place. Same with IP addresses. Again, threat intel lists, or, we've got these awesome tools like domain tools and Iris, and we can research that. But the thing of it is, it gets discouraging when, most of these are going to be false positives. That's just the nature of the game. And Chris, do you think I'm alone or just a bad SOC analyst? But I know the level of effort that I put into the same alarm in the morning isn't necessarily the amount of effort and mental acuity that I can give it late in the day after I've done this a million times. Do you know what I'm talking about there? And I think that's what we've been alluding to, right? The mental fatigue.
Sure, absolutely, and I think that that fatigue increases. With the fatigue increases based on the more repetitive and manual and non-value added work that one is doing. I think of SOC and security analysts. I think of them as detectives. To move to the physical world, and these are folks that you want them out actually detecting, spending time actually using, their instincts, their experience, their domain knowledge, to really figure out, is there potentially a crime going on here, something that is worth further investigating. And that's generally exciting work when you're doing the work, but if you are doing the equivalent of a bunch of paperwork and bureaucratic work, just moving things around and dealing with, filing cabinets and folders and all that, your job is not nearly as much fun nor rewarding. I think that fatigue goes up very quickly because it becomes tiresome. Of course, all of us, I certainly find myself as I've gotten a little bit older, getting more tired in the afternoon from a cognitive perspective. So I'm not sure we have a cure for that other than energy drinks and coffee. But I think ideally you're not fatiguing the SOC through remedial, repetitive, low value work that just is tiring to do.
Right. And if I have to go out and do all the legwork to find this data and to do a thorough investigation, it just becomes after a while like if I just don't have that sixth sense or that spider sense that this is the real thing, I'm always thinking like, I don't know if I want to, is it worth chasing down that rabbit hole? But if you can decrease the friction for looking something up in VirusTotal, or if the system can go out there and already have gotten me the information I need from domain tools, then to me that's a lot like the doctor who comes in and he's got limited time to deal with this patient. It's just the fact of the healthcare system. But in a well-run office, the other staff have put the patient's chart together. They've already taken the patient's vital signs, and now the doctor can come in and she's got all the information right at her fingertips. Maybe it's even displayed visually for her today at better doctors' offices. She can make a great decision and move on. And I think it's a very similar dynamic with SOC analysts today.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, and I think the operative word there is friction. I think that's a great word to use to describe what we're trying to remove when you think of automation orchestration is take as much friction out of the system, because the point you raise is very valid. That if I'm an analyst and I know that I could go look at if information on this particular user, but I've got to go log into another system, or I've got to go ask somebody else. And if there's friction there and it's a pain, they might decide, I'm going to skip it this time. I'm not sure it's worth it, so I'm going to skip it. But if that information is very easy to get and automated from a retrieval perspective, they're more likely to leverage it.
Yeah, I love it. So
quality of the decision is going to be better as a result.
So then when I talk to folks, putting my consultant's hat on, the ultimate goal here is to reduce risk, to detect attacks before real losses and real hurt and damage is sustained. And that means evaluating more alarms and doing a more effective, thorough, complete job on more alarms. But what I hear from people all the time, especially when I suggest to them, hey, don't you think you should be, are you collecting workstation logs, for instance? Do you know what's happening on your endpoints? And they're like, we're already deluged with too much information. We don't know where to start. The sheer number of alarms. We have trouble just prioritizing the alarms that we already have. We don't need more data because we can't wade through the stuff that we've got. And the worst thing is, folks saying we know stuff is getting by. So that's what I'm hearing. You talked, though, Chris, to a different pay scale or a different level of the organization. Are you getting similar thoughts? Is there the same kind of awareness at the executive level of the situation?
Yeah, I think there is growing awareness at executive level, and I think just within security teams, I think what we've seen over the past few years is really a transformation of thought in terms of organizations realizing that they need to invest in technology that enables their existing team to just to fundamentally be faster, be more efficient, be able to triage alarms more quickly, more accurately, investigate threats more quickly, more accurately. If there is an incident, be able to neutralize and mitigate it more quickly. And it's much different than what it was 5 years ago. It's really changed. We're seeing a lot of our customers adopting our security automation orchestration features. In our last adoption survey, I think about 1 out of 3 were using some part of our SAO feature set, and another third, so they want to use it within the next 12 months. That's profoundly different than what we would have seen even three years ago in terms of the number of organizations saying we want to begin to automate parts of our workflow, automate mitigations, where the organizations are now willing to support that, and where security teams and IT teams are able to work in concert with each other and agree that we're going to automate a collection of tasks because it allows us to more quickly mitigate certain threats without it having to go through like the IT change management process, which then might slow a mitigation down from what could be seconds to potentially days. If you think of a compromised user account and we can automate that, or analysts can press a button and disable that user account within seconds, IT and security are coming together saying, yeah, let's go do that. And that is much different than the state of the world even 2 years ago. And so I think the executive support from IT is a lot different in terms of organizations being able to really take advantage of the new class of capabilities around automating and orchestrating the SOC.
So let's distinguish one other thing, though, because when we were preparing for this webinar, I put out there that, pre-qualifying or disqualifying false positives, and by that I mean doing the extra legwork and the things that you can prescribe to be done and, articulate in an automatable fashion to eliminate stuff you're putting in front of human eyes. I was lumping that in with SAO, but you guys have a different perspective, and I'm coming around to your view of it, in that is fine tuning, and that's really part of the analytics that are upstream or should be upstream from security automation and orchestration. And by fine tuning, we're talking about either noise filtering, but you can't take that too far because you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But if you don't have the ability to get rid of, hopefully, the lion's share of the noise, that's part of what's driving the whole problem that we're talking about today. But I don't know, did I cover that well enough, or is there anything else that you think we should bring out about the difference between fine-tuning and SAO? They're both important.
I think they're critically important, but I think they are, opposite sides of the same coin when you look at, overall what a SOC needs to be able to do. Where the first thing that a SOC security needs to be able to do is to detect, those indicators that might actually represent a real threat, real compromise. And the second side of that is once there's, we detected and determine there is an indicator or an alarm, how quickly can we action that, through the security team? And I think as we look at it, SAO is really focused on, how does the team operate once there is an alarm? There's an indicator of something that might actually present a real threat, a real compromise. And the role of fine-tuning, we really see, as, how do you dial in, the analytics side of things so that, that ideally only, high-quality alarms, are being surfaced to the security team to then be further actioned on. And that tuning, I think, really a lot of it comes down to your tolerance for false positive load against false negative risk. But on the SAO side, they were really focused on, all right, so what, how fast can an alarm be triaged to determine, is there potentially a risk here? If risk potentially exists, how fast can be fully investigated? And if it ultimately ends up that there is an incident, how fast can that incident be mitigated and then ultimately, fully recovered from? It's really, those are the three areas that we see SAO really focusing on, where upstream of that, ideally we've got really well-tuned analytics that are surfacing, good high-quality intelligence.
All right, so good. So let's then talk about the role and what are our opportunities, what are we really trying to do then with SAO? And we've covered a lot of this before we've gotten to this point, but if we can improve the triage capability and either automate triage or get the information in place and stage it on the case before it gets before human eyes, then we're winning. If we can reduce the friction with the threat investigation, then we're winning. But then the other thing is the incident response. So once we've determined, yeah, this is an issue, then start thinking about, well, what's the next step? How do we mitigate this? Is it necessary to open a ticket and have some other team disable the account, or go do this or go do that, or can we just have the system do it? And we're going to show you some actual examples of that as we proceed, and especially as we turn things over to to Caitlin here in just a bit. But let's talk about some specific examples. I think one of the easiest ones to get is in a short video that we might share with you guys later, but it was done by Bruce Deeknine at LogRhythm, and he says, picture coming in the morning, and there's, I don't know, 52 alerts or alarms that you've got to look at. But you know what it turns out to be? 50 of them are all essentially duplicates about some outgoing traffic to an IP address that shows up on a threat intel list. The only difference between them is that they were for a few different user accounts. So instead of having to wade through and make that determination 50 times, what if your SIEM can recognize that, roll them all up to a higher level compound alarm and say, look, we saw this 50 times. The only difference is the user account. Here's all the information. So the analyst analyzes it one time, takes the IP address, looks at it on domain tools, sees that, oh, really, this showed up on a threat intel list because it was associated with a domain name that resolves to this IP address, but the domain name that our users were accessing was something very legitimate. This is a web hosting company. There's 5,000 different domain names on this IP address. This is a false positive, but he did it one time instead of 50. So that's what we mean here under aggregation of alarms and automatic case creation. The other thing is pulling in that threat intelligence and not having had to, do that manual effort that Chris was talking about. I mean, to do this, first thing I got to do is go out there and log on to the system. I got to get to the right screen. On and on. We pulled all that together for you. But beyond that, that's really just a basic example of security automation and orchestration. This, I think, a word that we haven't talked about a lot is maturity, Chris. And, does LogRhythm see SAO really as another step on the security monitoring maturity model?
Absolutely. I think it's a critical step. I think if teams today want to really be effective, I strongly believe that investing in some sort of SAO capability is going to be critically enabling to that team being, as effective as they can be and efficient and increasing their overall operational maturity. So I definitely agree with that. We use our own platform with our, to monitor our own network. And I think an example of us evolving our own maturity with SAO is our internal CISO team built an app we call the Phishing Intelligence Engine, which we've since made available to our customers via our community, where our organization, like everyone else out there, is subject to a lot of phishing attempts, and they consume a lot of time to go deal with. And so our team automated a lot of workflow around phishing, where if we see indicators of phishing through our analytics or as reported by employees, we have automated the creation of a new case that gets created automatically that then shows up in kind of our tier 1 SOC queue. They can then automate certain analysis tasks around what has been seen, aggregate like phishing attacks together under a single case. And then ultimately, once it's qualified, click a button that'll go and pull any similar maybe blanket phishing emails directly out of O365, so that we know that users can't click on them accidentally. And we've collapsed our time of going from a targeted inbound phishing attempt, to pulling emails out of O365, to within minutes, which has profoundly reduced our risk posture and likelihood of somebody click on a bad link. And that was us, maturing our own capability in one particular area around phishing that just really streamlined our operation and made our existing team much more efficient.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen it, Pi is really cool. We featured it in a webinar late last year. Brendan, if you have a moment, maybe you can rustle up the link to that recording and share it out through the chat window. But it's a great example of maybe automation taken to one of the furthest examples that I've seen. But there's a lot of that you can do in between, the two extremes. One of them is helping build the case. So maybe we see a low-level indicator of indicator of compromise associated with a given user. Maybe we see some abnormal or anomalistic behavior, and so maybe it's not time to put that in front of a user, in front of a SOC analyst, but maybe it is time to turn up the volume on the amount of data that we're collecting from that person's endpoint, so that if additional indicators of compromise or anomalies are associated with that user, then we've already been collecting information, and it's already there to be able to go back in time and see what's going on. I mean, that's an example of security automation too, in terms of being able to start collecting information at the right time in case the human analyst needs it later on in an alert. So the sky's the limit with the number of different things that you can do, but there's a few real-world use cases of automation. Let's now shift to the other part of SAO, and that's orchestration. So think about collaboration. I mean, very few of us work in complete isolation without any other team members, and and I tell you, the other thing is, if we are working in isolation, we probably shouldn't be, but maybe we are just because we don't have the collaboration tools. And so here is yet another example of where if things are too if things are too manual and we don't have the technology to support the human, then we just don't do as good of a job. There's always folks with varying areas of expertise and specialization, and if it's too much friction, then we're not going to reach out and get that team synergy. So, plus we're also going to waste a lot of productivity with answering questions and searching for emails and other stuff, where if we had all this together in one place, again, we could spend more time on the stuff that matters and less time on running around clicking on stuff. And so shared case management is what we're really talking about there in terms of orchestration. And that's being able also to go and capture what we did about this, so that we can start recognizing, this has come up multiple times, and we're starting to refine, because we can go back and see that it's happening multiple times, because we're able to evaluate the steps we took, we see a pattern emerging, and really there's a best practice way or a standard operating procedure that we should be following. So that's the next natural progression of orchestration, and that is to build out playbooks. And another thing I learned from this webinar is that playbooks aren't just for your tier one analysts that maybe are newer, less experienced, less technical, and less analytical. I think it was Caitlin. I think you made the point that, even as an advanced SOC analyst and security analyst, it's nice to have a playbook just so that you can not waste mental effort on thinking about, did I dot every I and cross every T? Can I throw that your way real quick, Caitlin?
Yeah, absolutely. The analogy that I came up with is when you try to go to the grocery store without a list, right? You may know exactly what you're making, but you don't want to be spending time standing there thinking, okay, what am I forgetting, right? Even for me, everyone in their day-to-day work, you have some way, you jot a note down to tell yourself to do something. That doesn't make you bad at your job, but it makes sure that you don't let that slip off your list, especially when you're having a lot of interruptions throughout your day. I don't know, how many of you don't get emails throughout the day, but I know I certainly do. You get people dropping by your desk, you get phone calls. When you're investigating something complex, you want to have an easy way to keep track of where you are on that list. So yeah, like you said, even if I don't necessarily need to be handheld through everything, having that peace of mind of like, okay, wait, where was I? What was I working on? And being able to pick that up really fast and not have to retrace your steps is one of the really handy things. And along with that, you can customize it, right? So you can adjust your playbooks to match what your organization needs, what your team needs. So you could have separate playbooks for depending on which tier is working on a particular scenario, so you can have more or less detail, again, customized to what you need for your level of expertise, your level of needs for tracking things like compliance, right? No one wants to finish a thing and look back and think, oh God, did I document that thing that I'm supposed to do? Again, I can't overstate, how important it is to have that checklist, and not just the checklist, but also something trackable, right? If you have a document that says, here's what I'm supposed to do, and you say, all right, I'm done, great. But when you come back later, you're not going to have a history of when that work got done. So ideally, you have that kind of playbook integrated with your, case management, ticketing system, whatever, so that you have, a record of when you completed those things and how long it took you, because then now you have a lot more data to analyze your response times, analyze what steps are taking the longest, what parts do I maybe want to look into automating. There's just a huge amount of benefit just from kind of doing that work and standardizing those processes.
Yeah, 2 comments on that. With compliance, it's not enough to do it right. You have to prove that you did it right. And who wants to spend time documenting that you did it right? That is, again, just depressing and mind-numbing, aside from being unproductive. Second, we're hearing, some really good things that if you're thinking about how to communicate this to management, we're hitting some notes that are going to resonate with management big time. And that is, aside from just productivity, making processes repeatable and consistent and proving that they happened. Management like stuff like that for good reason. So orchestration then, hopefully I've articulated enough, spent enough time on this for you to see the difference between automation and orchestration. Chris, what about communicating all of this stuff up to management? How do we at the practitioner level communicate the need of SAO in a way that's compelling to management?
Yeah, sure. So, I'll try to cover this quickly to try to, leave room for Caitlin to get onto the demo. I think at a high level, management, really cares about a couple of big things, right? From a security perspective, it's all about risk management. So how's SAO going to help us reduce, our cyber risk? And I think the keys there are going to be efficiency of the existing team. SAO is going to help us as a team be more efficient. We're going to be able to get through more potential indicators of threat, less likely something's going to slip past the team, and we're going to be able to respond to incidents faster. And we're going to collapse, the amount of time it potentially takes, the amount of time in which a threat could be active in our environment, potentially get to a high-profile damaging data breach. And so I think communicating in terms of reduced cyber risk through increased operational efficiency is the key play there. That also then gets back to the other thing management loves, which is ROI. I'm going to go spend money on a new technology and train people on how to use it. What's my ROI? Well, the ROI is reduced cyber security risk, but the ROI is measurable improvements in productivity of the security team. And with certain platforms like LogRhythm, where you have metrics, you can actually demonstrate that to LogRhythm and actually show that we're able to get through more alarms more quickly, more efficiently. Our time to detect, time to respond are collapsing across time. And we're doing this without having to add more staff. The existing organizational investment in the team is realizing better a reduction in cybersecurity risk, through technology. And I think those are the key points I would focus on. And I'd love if here we might be able to pivot to Caitlin and maybe have her show the group what it looks like in action.
Yeah, let's do that, because you can't just throw more people at this problem, and we need to save people for what they're good at. And so, Caitlin, I'm going to make you the presenter, and let's get out of the theoretical and see some technology.
All right, sounds good. All right, so you should be seeing my slide right now. I promise I only have a couple slides just to set up the scenario before we dive into the demo. Yeah. So this section I feel like we've covered pretty thoroughly, but just talking at a high level about the combination of automation and orchestration. So one of the things I like to point out about automation, it's incredibly valuable, and it's usually the most valuable when there's a standard input and output that doesn't need significant review or intervention. So this kind of automation is really valuable when it's consistent, right? When it's automatic. So you don't want something that requires a lot of nuance to be automated, but for, again, those repetitive actions we've been talking about, going out and retrieving data or just hitting simple search endpoints to get answers back, making that quick. And so that needs to go hand in hand with the orchestration piece. You can't just have automation to handle your more complex scenarios, and that's why we have security analysts who can take in all of that data that was automatically collected and make it really easy for them to get started doing that more complex analysis, and then make it really easy for them to remediate, take the right corrective actions. And the combination of automation and orchestration should make it easy to do the right thing and to do things right. Automation makes it really easy to make sure that those things that you've done are consistent and that you can track all of those things through your orchestration system. And as part of that orchestration, we talked a lot about collaboration, about being able to do, that kind of detailed tracking of the things that you've done. You don't want to lose that valuable information that your analyst has found, that they've used their knowledge to come to these conclusions, and you don't want to lose that as part of your documentation, as part of your, collective knowledge base of your SOC. So you need to have good tools for both of those things. Otherwise, you're only getting half of that picture. And so that's kind of the two together is going to give you the most effective end-to-end analysis and response when it comes to incidents in your environment. So I feel like we've gone through this kind of theory. So let's talk a little bit about the scenario I'm going to be going through. So essentially, I'm going to be talking about alarming on suspicious emails, and specifically about a suspicious email phishing campaign that's propagating through my environment. So just again, for the sake of time, we've kept this a little bit simple. So just to set us up, so we have a list of known phishing campaign subject lines. So this is something that could be populated by a threat intelligence service. It could be coming from a tool like Pi, where you might have that set up to pull in those suspicious subject lines. So again, part of that is pre-populating that kind of information so that, again, preventing alarm fatigue, so that you're having qualified alarms in the first place. So I can design an alarm. A simple alarm might just be, hey, if any of these subject lines show up, I want to fire an alarm. But maybe that on its own isn't necessarily the right way to do that, right? Some known phishing campaigns have pretty innocuous subject lines like job offer. You don't necessarily want to be flooding your SOC with those kinds of emails. So what I might look for is a more complex scenario, which is that not only did Bob receive that email, but within a window of time, he has sent an email with that exact same subject line, right? That's a much more suspicious story, and that's something that I can put together, again, through how I've designed that alarm. And so when those two things happen, now I actually do want an alarm. This is the point where, you know, I've relied on my alarming system to do that initial triage of, is this actually a series of incident events, interesting events, and now I want my analyst to be doing a little bit more work to, you know, validate this and determine what the next steps are. So I'll design a rule, and this is just a quick view of our rule wizard for designing something like that, to just look at that series of events, correlate them, and look for where the recipient and the result are the same in a series of time. So here's where automation comes in. So what I want, again, is to make my analysts have to do as few, you know, repetitive clicks, repetitive actions as possible. So when this alarm fires, I'm going to have it set up to do a bunch of actions automatically so that by the time I'm even looking at this, a lot of work has already been done for me. A lot of information has been gathered. So we talked a little bit about automatically creating a case. And that includes associating to an existing case. So as mentioned, Bruce did a really good quick demo on this, but, you know, making sure that if I come in and there are 50 alarms, but they're all, let's say, for the same email campaign, just for different users, I don't want to have 50 separate cases to have to work through. I'd like those to get aggregated. So the alarm that we've got has been set up to do that aggregation automatically. So again, it's going to attach that alarm to the case for me. It's going to condense multiple alarms into that one case. It's going to add a summary of my alarm to the case. So this is, again, making it easy so that when I log in as an analyst, I get this notification that a case has been made. I see right there, here are my alarms, here are the people who were impacted by it, directly already documented. And all of this, you know, if I come back to my case a year from now, all of this information is still going to be referenceable in there, and it's going to be, you know, point in time accurate based on the data that was in that alarm. And then this ties into what we talked about earlier. I've got that pre-configured playbook attached to it. So I'll be talking about playbooks a little bit more later, but these tie in really nicely with that orchestration story. So this is the tool. I've customized it based on what I need in my SOC, but it's going to give me either, you know, highly specific guidance on steps that should be taken. So maybe I'm a tier 1 analyst and I'm new, or, you know, I have just joined this company and I don't necessarily know all of the tools. This playbook's going to make it so I'm not having to context switch. I don't have to have a senior analyst looking over my shoulder and spending a bunch of time making sure that I know how to do things. I can have that documented in my playbook. Or if I'm a more advanced user, it's, again, that kind of grocery shopping-esque list of just, you know, that peace of mind checklist. And then I can have some remediation queued. So in this example, I have queued up the ability to, let's say, disable an AD account if I'm genuinely concerned that their account credentials have been compromised. I want to temporarily disable it. I might perform other remediation like we talked about, hitting Office 365 to remove that email, things like that. But again, making this a one-click remediation step so that I'm not having to go into a bunch of different tools, as well as, you know, making it, I don't have to think really hard about what I need to do. Again, it's making it as simple as possible for me to do the right thing and do it correctly. And so, yeah, you can think a little bit about, you know, other scenarios, what kind of automations you could potentially set up. So that could be something like isolating a host or taking it offline, updating your firewalls. all of those things can be built in to either automatically happen or to require approval from an analyst. And that's where you're really benefiting from your analyst's knowledge and their analysis, because you don't necessarily want to instantly disable someone's email account, right? If you have a more nuanced scenario, you want to make sure that this is valid before you go ahead and take those remediation actions. All right, so enough with the slides. Let's switch to the demonstration. All right, so I want to make sure my session hasn't expired. So all right, there we go, my login screen. All right. So I'm an analyst, and I've hopped onto my LogRhythm deployment to start my day, and I can see here a lot of alarms have fired overnight. These are that specific alarm we talked about, that email propagation with a suspicious subject. And so, you know, first thing I'll want to do is just take a quick look and see the information behind this alarm. So part of this ties in, again, with that orchestration. I want to be able to customize the kind of data that I'm getting back when I'm looking at my alarms. You know, there's a ton of data that comes back from your logs, things like that, but there's only a specific subset that you're really interested in. So being able to set up your alarm to show you that interesting information makes my job as an analyst a lot easier to quickly see this. So I can see here right away that this is the email address that was impacted, and this was that subject line. And so I can browse through these alarms and see, you know, there's actually, it looks like there's a few different campaigns going on in my environment with a few different subject lines. And I don't want to have to go through, you know, all of these alarms one by one to see, you know, which ones go with which. So as part of our automations that I talked about earlier, I can come down into my Smart Response section, and this is where I can see those automations that have happened so far. So for me, you know, I'm looking through these, and I want to know, all right, what's happened so far, so I can see that my alarm has been added to a case, playbook has been added, and then I've got this remediation queued up. So this is where I'll be able to come back later and approve the steps that I've pre-configured to execute using ARM. So, and that's the alarming and response management tool. So jumping ahead, so what I've got in here, so you can see I've actually got individual cases created for each campaign, and I've got some other cases that I've made earlier, so these are suspicious activity, and these are grouped by locations. So this is, again, to emphasize that making it so that you can easily segregate out the investigations you make and group together those alarms that maybe are all from that same campaign. So looking in this particular case, I can see that these two alarms in particular are using this particular campaign. So this is the "Don't let this opportunity pass you by" subject line. So now that I've got this, I've already have all of this data pulled in here automatically. I've got the email address information, I've got the all of the different people who have been affected, and then I've got all of these notes about the other details of the alarm. And you can, again, you can think about some other automations that you could put in here to gather all that information right away. So you could, we talked about earlier, pulling in Active Directory information. So you could do a smart response that goes and hits Active Directory, comes back with those details for the accounts that were affected, and puts that into the case for me. So now I'm not having to context switch into that different view. I've already got that right there in my case. And so while I'm working on this case, I want to be able to collaborate really easily. So I want to be able to, you know, adjust ownership, add other people, so I can come in here and add fellow collaborators that I want to come help me work on this case. So, you know, just by adding these people, they're going to be getting notifications letting them know that, hey, you've been added to this case, and they'll be able to drop in here and, again, have that information. So again, it's really, you know, as part of your workflow, I would recommend in your current SOC, you know, take some time to sit and watch your fellow analysts, or if you're a manager, come and watch your team and see how much time they're spending switching between views or having to do the same things over and over. And, you can take notes on seeing where those inefficiencies are in your SOC and consider, how can I make this workflow better? What kind of things should I be automating? Watching people use a tool is, I've always said it's the best way to see how you can improve your workflows and improve your tools. Use the power of the tools that you have to make your team more efficient. So as these users are, hopping in and doing their investigation, things like that, I can still navigate around and do my investigation. And basically all the time I have my case built in over here on the left so that I can continue to add evidence and things like that. And so I can say, these are some new logs and put in descriptions and things like that. But from here, this is where playbooks really come in handy. So we talked a little bit earlier about this concept of playbooks, and this is actually in particular a playbook that LogRhythm has developed specifically to guide in responding to phishing incidents. And so right here in this case panel, as I'm doing my investigation, I have this breakdown of the steps that I want to take to address a phishing campaign. So as part of this, I can expand them out and see, more or less detail about this. I've maybe configured this to be a bit more short so that it's more of a checklist because, my team doesn't need the super detailed information, but we do want to be able to check and make sure, yep, we've documented everything, we've, looked into the specific kind of fish, pulled in the headers, things like that. And so, again, tying back into that collaboration piece, that really important orchestration is being able to assign out these individual tasks. So my collaborators will get notified that, they need to be working on specific steps. I'm sure you've heard of the diffusion of responsibility idea, and that's where if you, say, hey, can someone help me with this versus, hey, Sam, I need you to take this, you're going to get a lot more engagement and a lot faster response. Just by doing that more specific assignments out. And again, all of this gets tracked as part of your case's history. So you want to be able to make it really easy to report back later. If you have a significant incident in your environment and you resolve it, how do you think it's going to go if you just say like, hey, boss, I'm done? Right? They're usually going to want to know, okay, well, what happened? What did you do? What was, completed when? Well, you'll have this really detailed, not only an evidence locker to show them all of the things that you collected, but you'll also have this record showing step by step, here is what my team achieved. Here are the things that they did within their playbooks. Here are the notes that they entered. All of that is, we want to make that really easy to keep that documentation, being able to enter those notes just as you're going through really quickly, dashing them off, on the side into your case panel, because otherwise you're losing that expertise, and we keep coming back to this about analyst mental cycles, things like that. If you're just having people check the box, hit the go button, you're losing the actual thought that they had as they were doing that more detailed analysis. So coming back, I just wanted to show, right here in my alarm, I can come in here and at this point say, all right, it's time for me to approve this. I've determined that this was, indeed something that needs to be remediated. That's it. I've clicked that approve button and now it's going to go back and perform all of that remediation, and I can add any notes to my case that puts in details about that automation and what came back from it. So, fitting that automation in to my story. And so the last thing, actually I wanted to look at time. So there's a couple things I wanted to show. So we've talked a little bit about being able to customize your playbooks. So this is just the playbooks area where I can import playbooks, things like that. But when I come into this playbook, we've tried to make it really simple for you to create, manage your playbooks, and come in and customize these. So again, when you get those LogRhythm playbooks or, playbooks that people are going to be able to share back and forth, being able to come in here and customize them, you can do things like associating tags to your playbooks, and this is, again, can tie back into that automation story. setting up when an alarm fires, I want to create a case and I want to tag it based on, maybe the metadata that's in this. I want to tag my cases by host, or I want to tag it by the compromise type. So, in this case, I have this tagged as compromised account and phishing, so that when I'm maybe working on a case I've made myself based on hunting activities, I can pull in this orchestration guide and still make it really easy to follow these steps and find exactly what I want to be using. And that includes things like being able to attach things. So, some of you might be thinking about your existing documentation you have around orchestration, existing things, existing references. You don't necessarily want to throw that out. So you can associate that with your playbook so that, again, all of that is, permanently referenceable as part of that case playbook. You can come in here and download things like PDFs or files directly from that view. Again, preventing someone having to switch back and forth between contexts, or where did I save that file, or I need to go pull that from my email, reducing that kind of mental load of those actions. So last thing I wanted to demonstrate was talking a little bit about dashboards. So being able to have a really easy way to see, not only the status of cases in your environment, but also being able to see that orchestration story. So seeing what are the incomplete procedures in my environment. So for me, actually, I've configured this to only show me procedures that have been assigned to me that are incomplete. So I can just have this sitting on a screen, and I'll be able to see if someone has assigned me a new procedure. I'll get an email, but I'll also see really quickly it's going to pop up here in my queue, and I can click on that, hover on it just to see that summary of what I need to do, or I can click on it to get to that case and look into the state of that data and see what my next steps are. And I can have things like a heads-up view of the number of cases that are in my environment. I can set this up just to show me, what procedures are past due. So if you are, a SOC manager, and this can be a great thing just to have on a heads-up display, right? Just really quickly, here are all of the incomplete procedures, and here are the ones that are past due. And, you want that column, you want that widget to always be empty. And then tying that in, again, being able to see your metrics trends. So how quickly are you detecting and responding to incidents in your environment? As a team, being able to watch that trend line go down, is a really encouraging note of, okay, our processes are working. Being able to, filter these things by different types of incidents, again, making it really easy to identify when your orchestration, when your automation is working, or when you might need to adjust it, right? So if you have, let's say, set up your widgets to show you different metrics for your different types of compromises, and you see, what we do great with phishing, but our malware is pretty slow. That's an indicator that, okay, maybe we need to start looking into, are there automations we're not using that we should? Are there steps in our playbook that maybe need to be more detailed because people are spending too much time on them? Or are we getting caught by skipping steps? So again, it's part of what I'm, trying to demonstrate here is just that end-to-end flow is really important to be paying attention to. Not just, making sure your automations are working, but making sure once that's handed to an analyst that they're going to have a really simple time being able to pull in people and then focus their energy on doing that analysis that that's what you've hired them for, is to be able to apply their expertise and apply that kind of hands-on analysis to the incidents in your environment. So that about wraps it up. I tried to make sure I'm not taking up too much time. So if there are any questions?
We've got some great questions, Caitlin. And I just want to say, this is way up the maturity model in terms of making it repeatable, formalizing it, but also providing a great work environment for analysts, and just automatically building the documentation that you need for compliance as you go without that drudgery. I love it. So listen, first of all, just a quick comment from Ross. He kind of confirms our feelings on some things. He says that the deluge of information anesthetizes analysts, and that's a good way to put it. I like it. Just numbs you. Peter says he's really looking forward to implementing Pi on their LogRhythm implementation. It's going to be great for their phishing issues. There's a lot of interest in Pi in the comments. But Lucas has a question. He says, when you or LogRhythm say that, talk about playbooks, do you mean automated plays or manual ones? And so let's enlarge upon that something. But this is a tool for humans to use, Caitlin, playbook.
Yes. Yeah. So these right now are intended to be, you can maybe think of them as run books. So again, keeping track of those actions that a person needs to do, and be able to look at those automations as part of your alarm. So because a lot of remediation is specifically tied to that alarm, making it so that's embedded as part of your alarm actions. So that being said, we do have plans to integrate that automation into your playbook so that one of your steps might be, within that playbook breakdown. And here you'd have an automation that says, based on what you found in the previous step, run this automation, and being able to run that directly from the playbook. So we are trying to do that phased approach of again, focusing on this gap that we've seen, which is that orchestration side of things. There isn't really a ton out there to make it easy to do this direct step-by-step tracking and being able to customize that. So it is intended for analysts to use as a reference and as a step-by-step guide for them to execute.
Timothy wants to know, are playbooks new in 7.3?
So playbooks are new in 7.4, so that is currently getting ready for the GA release later this year.
Okay. And Harry asks, where do you get the playbook for phishing that Caitlin has shown? This playbook that I have right now is based on those playbooks that, as I mentioned, Labs is working on generating to share with this GA release. So those are going to be available on the LogRhythm community. So it's community.logrhythm.com. We have a shareable section, and in there you'll be able to browse and download the various the various playbooks that we've made. So I believe the plan right now, we've got about 10 playbooks that are getting edited and ready for release. And so you'll be able to check those out there. While I'm talking about it, it's also a nice place to go for dashboards and a lot of good, again, shareables that you can pull into your environment and customize for your own SOC. And folks, keep your questions coming, please, on SAO or LogRhythm specific implementation of it. I would like to hear from folks just their thoughts on the whole case management and collaboration aspect too. But Dominic, here's kind of a long question from Dominic. Maybe you can see it, Caitlin, but he asks, is this demo using the LogRhythm web-based console or the thick client? Let's take that. You want to take these one at a time, or do you see his question there from Dominic?
I don't. Oh, wait. So here's the question section. So, if you could read them to me, that'd be really helpful. But yeah, this is the web console interface. Okay,
so it's the web console. It says, now, does LogRhythm have role-based capabilities? And if so, can roles be set up for specific sites or i.e. subnets in a large corporation? And so that would be for where analysts are distributed throughout the country and have responsibility over sections of the network.
Right. So you can essentially set up your analysts with access based, down to the log source type, down to the specific log source. So you could configure your analysts to have access to different data sets, as well as configuring, which alarms that they can see. And we have this concept of entities permissioning so that you can set up analysts to have access to those different entities, which are controlled by which hosts are assigned to them. And then, for case management, you specifically have access for your analysts. They only have access to cases they've created or have been invited to. So your global admins, which is what we call kind of the administrators of your entire environment, they can see all of the cases, they can jump in and add themselves, but the individual analysts would be only able to access the specific alarm or specific cases they've been assigned to. And then those auto-remediation actions are associated to individual alarms, so those are pre-configured, so you can set those up to be as powerful or as, more constrained depending on, which analysts are going to have access to them. And then you can also actually launch or run some of these automation actions directly from the UI. So when you're doing that log analysis and things like that, you can run automations right from that view, and you can also constrict that by role. So you can set up different user profiles and control, this set of users I trust to run these more advanced automations, and this set of users maybe I only want to give them the more basic remediations.
Awesome. There's so the other aspect of Dominic's question is thick client versus web client. Are these capabilities exclusive to one of them? And to me, that just means we need to maybe just make some comments on what the two are and their purposes and future and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now the client console or, thick client is for administration. So we are largely investing all of our work around workflow, analyst, UIs, things like that into our web console. So all of the features you've seen today pretty much. So the case management tool, playbooks, dashboards, widgets, the alarm dashboard, all of that is only in the web console. And then you can go back to that client console to do more of the, administering hosts, administering agents, things like that.
Now, Caitlin, I don't remember where you were at the top of the hour, but Chris says Chris is obviously a LogRhythm user. He says it might be worth showing how it displays in grid view versus card view on the web UI. If that prompts something, great. Otherwise, the other comment that Chris has, Caitlin, is having used case management heavily since its first release, he says, we found it essential for managing and gathering events. Participating with folks like Caitlin has given us a greater understanding of how to manage alarms, how to cluster events, track how we process cases, and have an audit trail for how we resolve them. Perfect next step is to move on to playbooks. So I'm hearing over and over again a maturity model here, and learning about our operation as a SOC team and not treating everything as though it's the first time we've seen it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for anyone who's interested who hasn't had a chance to try out case management, we do have a training video I made called Case Management 101, which is intended to literally just get you started, where are the buttons, where do I click, and how do things work, so that, it's not talking about case management theoretically, it's talking about those specifics. So again, that's on the LogRhythm community, so it's a good kicking off point for folks who just haven't had a chance to check that out yet.
So James says, are automation actions like go to virus total with something, or run an investigation with certain information in an alarm? So I think maybe we just take a step back and just take another whack at saying, here's what automation is, what we can do. When an alarm comes in, what are some things we can automate? And maybe some small examples.
Okay, so I have actually a couple of automation options that are set up in this environment. So let me see if I can pull those up for you really quickly. So we have a few things. So we do have these smart responses, like I mentioned. You can run them directly from here. So we have some actions. These are, again, some fairly simple ones. So but being able to say go and disable or enable Active Directory accounts, modify lists, reset passwords, resolve a host name, unlock an account, and we talked a little bit earlier about building integrations into Office 365, so you could potentially have an automation to generate an email to open a ticket with IT. You can, again, doing those firewall updates, host isolation, but basically all of these are just executing scripts that you've written, so it's completely customizable. You don't have to rely on us to write them, though we do have them available on the community. You can absolutely write them yourself to integrate with any tool that has that kind of API available or any scripting interactions available, so that you can set any of these up to run automatically or with approvals via an alarm, or you can run them directly from your interface as part of your analyst workflow. So being able to come in here and say, I want to disable, based on what I'm seeing here, I want to disable, this person's account, and then being able to put in and designate what's the domain, provide authentication, because, maybe you want the people who are doing this to have specific permission. You can have it prompt them for their login, and then just run it directly from here. So I'm not sure if that kind of answers the question. Yep. But the other thing that we actually recently added is this additional contextualized actions tool. So right now we just have something pretty basic set up, which is just a Google search. But using this to, if you think about kind of all the different websites that you use, that you tab out to, those bookmarks that you have, if you have a folder of bookmarks that you always tab over to search for, let's say Windows message IDs or things like that, being able to set it up to basically automatically create those searches for you. And so that is part of this contextualized tool over here. So I actually have a ultimate Windows security event lookup configured, but what this lets me do is it can go and run a search for event IDs. So I've got this configured so that for my vendor message IDs, it can go and look up an event ID using this wildcard. So we've got a few different ways, either through scripting or through more simple search construction to make it a lot easier to share this out as well. So being able to make this so, I think this is great, I want everyone to be able to use it, or maybe I have some specific tools I use myself and I can just restrict those to me. But sharing those kind of analyst tools really easily is part of the idea of this kind of integrated contextual automations, as well as those configured contextual searches.
Getting rid of the friction.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so Lucas wants to know how much of this will be available via API in the 7.4 release.
So, smart responses can already be used to hit APIs directly. And if you're talking about playbooks in particular, so all of our case management has a full case API. And let me open up another tab and see if I can get that documentation pulled up. But all of that, case docs. Okay, so all of that is available through an API. So we've got full documentation so that, again, that smart response that we have running earlier, that is opening a case, attaching playbooks, things like that, all of that is being done through the case API. So everything that you can do through the UI for case management can be done via an API. So we actually have a lot of people building kind of really cool different integrations, being able to do things like reporting and exporting out data, doing syncs with ticketing systems. All of that is available through our API.
Let's see here. Dominic, what LogRhythm versions required for case management? When does that get introduced?
Case management we've had around for years at this point. So I think we first released it maybe back in 6.3.5?
7.1.
Or 7.1?
Believe.
Yeah, so we've case management's been around for a bit. So, but we have been steadily adding a lot of functionality to it over time. So And like I mentioned, Playbooks is coming out in 7.4. So yeah, the more recent of a version you're on, the more cool functionality you're going to get.
Yeah, I think everything Caitlin's shown except, the more like the procedural playbooks, that have the tasks and, more the manual playbooks is available in the current 7.3 product, which is our current GA product. And then the playbooks that you showed, which, kind of have the tasks and the manual processes you go through for certain types of actions, that's coming out in 7.4, which should be GA in July.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of stuff in case that I, haven't had a chance to go through. And again, I recommend that video. But being able to look at things like your metrics and using the workflow, associating cases, things like that. So a lot of these things, like I mentioned, have been incrementally added. So things like metrics were added back in 7.1, I believe. And there's, integrations with things like you can generate reports and have those scheduled automatically to get some of those environmental metrics. So you can have a monthly report of how are we doing, and you can do breakdowns by tags and things like that. So, yep.
Okay, now Dhirendra takes us a little bit different direction, but it's probably worth at least mentioning. What kind of machine learning algorithms do you use for email spam classification? Now, I don't know if machine learning has, if there's a machine learning story with Pi, but I definitely know there's a supervised machine learning story with LogRhythm.
So our cloud AI technology is really where you'll find our most modern leverage of machine learning for analytics and support of advanced threat detection. You're currently cloud AI is being applied towards our user entity and behavioral analytics offering, or UEBA offering. On the email side for Pi, as part of that app, our CISO team, they did build some additional analytics that are performed outside the platform as part of the app, but they're not really deep in ML. I think our focus for Pi is more around how do we make the workflow around dealing with suspected phishing as efficient as possible, where that's detected by maybe third-party systems that can provide some of that ML analytics across the determination of we think this is phishing, or honestly just, we've trained our workforce to report anything that appears to be phishing, because as far as I know, nobody has built a detection technology as 100% accurate in detecting phishing. So we leverage what's out there for detecting it in automated ways that a company may have already employed, and then we also make it really easy for somebody in our organization to get an email into our SOC and then automate the workflow from there if we see something that looks like phishing across our workforce.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered all the questions, and we're getting down to the bottom of the hour. I'll throw out a few thoughts I'd like to leave folks with, and anybody else can jump in who would like to. But, this is really about automating the repetitive and labor-intensive work, not just to make the job nicer, but to be more productive and to reduce risk. And that doesn't just increase SOC throughput, but it keeps us fresh for recognizing the actual attack that we're looking for. Because there's nothing more tragic in my book than when you go back and do the post-mortem and say, the indicators were there, the LED lit up, but nobody was looking at the LED, or nobody, bothered to investigate it. And a lot of it is just good business process management that we are applying across the board in every other aspect of businesses, and that is refining our process, formalizing our process, consistently following the process, being able to show that we've done that, and the ability to collaborate and leverage the synergy of our team. But when we go to management, we don't want to focus on, look at how I can pull up Virus Total and swivel over to domain tools and look up this IP address against threat lists, I think we all shared some really good hints from Caitlin and especially Chris on how to cast this in terms that will be compelling to management so we get their support. But thanks, guys, for pushing SIM technology forward and for making today's real training for free possible.
Absolutely.
It's our pleasure. Thanks all for attending. Thank you, Randy.
All right. Take care, everybody. We'll be in touch again soon, and bye-bye for now.